What is up, nerd friends? Welcome back to the Nerd Bench. Today, we're going to pull apart a motor that has a damaged bearing and see what the insides of this look like. We get asked often if the bearings in these motors are replaceable, and the answer that I've gotten from engineering department for years is basically no. They're not designed to be a replaceable bearing. That's the wrong size wrench. But I've taken these apart a couple times for cleaning purposes, and I think it's always a good idea to share some of that. So we're going to take this guy apart. If you look at it from the outside, there are only two screws that hold anything together. And the reason that is there's just the cap on the back for the timing plate, and then the stator has this front can kind of pressed onto it. So it doesn't really come off. So getting the bearings out can be tricky, to say the least. But to get into this, it's always a good idea before you start loosening any screws to get all the loose dirt off of the motor externally, which I did not do. I like to get in there with a little brush sometimes and try to get all these big chunks off of here. Just so that you don't have that much dirt floating around while you're working on stuff. So these screws come out, set those off the side. It's a 2mm wrench, in case you're wondering. And then you should be able to rotate this end bell a bit, and then it'll start to wiggle as you pull it back off. There's a little seam right there. I'm trying to get my fingernail under there. But let's see, maybe we gotta give this guy a little lift. There we go. Just using the edge of the wrench and prying back ever so slightly so that these guys pop up and out. And then you should be able to slide this cap off, he says. It's not an easy process. I should have done this one. There we go. So once you get that off, oh, look at that. The bearing blew up so hard that one of its inner balls is all the way at the back. And this is what the sensor side looks like. That bearing feels totally fine, so I'm going to leave that one alone and see if we can't get this other guy out. So, tricky part is when you pull these rotors out, the rotor is the magnet, and it wants to stick to one side or the other. And on the 4-pole motors, the rotors are wrapped with a Kevlar, so you try not to scratch that if you can, and it can be a little bit tricky. So I'm trying to hold it centered and then push on the shaft at the same time and get this all out in kind of one felt swoop. And that guy did get scratched up, and you see it's got a bunch of things stuck to it from the bearing that exploded. There's even parts of the bearing still here on the shaft. I'm not sure. We're going to have to give a look at this if it's going to be reusable or not. But and then to get the seat down in there, there's the remainder of the bearing. And this next part's a little bit tricky, to say the least. And what I'm going to do is end up trying to jam it from this side, and try to catch the race and see if I can't get it to loosen up that way. And if that doesn't work, the only other one that I've run into is that you can drill this face out because the bearing doesn't sit all the way in here. And if you open this front hole up a little bit, you can get some access in there. So bear with me while we figure out what we're gonna do here. Ugh, gross. Well, I'm definitely starting to have a bigger appreciation for why they say these bearings aren't replaceable. Right along the edge, you can see that where they have the space for the bearing to sit. I'm just trying to get myself a little bit of clearance so I can get something in there and push that bearing race out. Because even if I open this side up a little bit too much, it's okay because the bearing sits in from the inside, and I shouldn't be able to take off so much that I lose that wall. If the bearing didn't blow up, you can kind of just bash the bearing out of here from the front. Well, sometimes you can. All right, it came out, but where did it go? So now the trick is getting all the bits and pieces from that bearing out of there. Here's another piece of the race. So I got the hole cleared. Basically, you drill the face out till, what size was that? So it says it's a 7/16 step. Yeah, laugh at my unibit all you want. I got the bearing out. So now the trick would be to replace the bearing, and lucky for me, I have some bearings. Before we get into any of that though, we're gonna clean this motor out. It's full of dirt. This thing was in one of the 4x4 short courses from the Peacock pit, Ethan's truck actually, and something got into the gear, smoked the bearing, and we replaced the motor. So I always kind of salvage this guy so that we have another backup motor for the crew. And I think it's always good that if you can fix something instead of replacing it, you might as well try. And while this is not an ideal situation, like I said, the engineers always tell me the bearings are not replaceable, and I have a very good appreciation for why they say that. There's not an easy way to pop these guys in and out of here without destroying the bearing. And if you destroy the bearing, the race gets stuck in there, and you can't get the race out because it's hidden behind this face shield. Lucky for me, I have stuff like this that I get to drill holes in and see what's going on. So I figured this is something that is savable, you know, if you can. So let me get the bearing. I'll be right back. So these bearings are 5x13s, if I'm not mistaken. Inside's a 5, outside's a 13. Super fancy digital calipers. And then I'm going to set this to the side for now, and we're going to try to get some cleanup on this rotor. The folks tear these apart and they ask us, well, where do the spacers go? They kind of only go on one way. All of your adjustment spacers go on this side, and they take the end plate out of the motor. You also got to check this rotor over very carefully for any bearing pieces stuck to it, because when that bearing exploded, they didn't catch it, and they kept driving the car around for a little bit, and that just circulates the parts into the motor. You could use a little bit of contact cleaner on this stuff if you had like some good old-fashioned motor spray or electric cleaner that's safe for plastics. That way it doesn't eat up the glues or the epoxies or anything, and wipe it down. But for the most part, I just wipe this stuff down and put it back together. That dirt isn't going to really get any worse than it is. I would be the easy way for me to say it. It's not ideal. Obviously, you want it to be squeaky clean, but this thing had a good hard life. So if we just get it clean enough that it works correctly again, I think that's all we're really going to have to worry about here. So nothing's like frayed. Oh, there's, see? I got another piece of the bearing. There's another one. We definitely don't want any metal chunks floating around inside the motor. It's probably smart to not put it right on the table where you're working too, but hey, nobody ever said I was smart. All right, so wipe that guy down, and you can see the bearing had a rough life. Like, it failed before that happened and then overheated. That's why the shaft got all marked up there. Leave that guy over there. And to install the bearing, it's a little tricky, because there's bearing install tools that you can get and use that kind of hold bearings in place and make this task a whole lot easier, but who likes doing things the easy way? You want to make sure that the place where the bearing goes is nice and clean. I don't know if you can see that, but once stuff stop coming out of that area, usually that means it's pretty clean. Give this guy a wipe out. It never hurts just to do a little tap. If there's any loose bits in there, get those guys to fall out. Now, ideally, you want to use a bearing install tool for something like this. It locks the bearing into place. Make sure you get in there nice and square. You can, like what I'm going to go for, is setting this flat on the table and then pressing the bearing straight down in there. Ideally, you'd want to have like a proper press and all that to do this correctly, but we're just going to wing it and see what happens. All right, so when I go to get something to press on the bearing, you want it to be larger than the diameter, so it pushes on the outside edge of the bearing and you're not, working the bearing. So this is a 10mm wrench that I'm gonna try to use for this. And then also, let's clean up this workspace, because clean the workspace off, because that was pretty gross. I did not wash my hands, obviously. So I'm going to take this guy, slide it like this, and get it kind of pressed gently into place. So it's just kind of sitting on that inner race, not pushing on it too hard. And then I'm going to take this guy and give it the old tappy. It's hard to see, but it's not quite flat, and I think I caught it just crooked and dinged that bearing shield. This is why you're supposed to use a press for this. All right, don't laugh. This may or may not work. My plan is to use a truck axle, because it's the same diameter as the bearing, slide that through here, and I got a large nut on the end of this so that it presses on the outside edge of the race instead. And then if this works, I'm gonna get this guy through here. I'm gonna put another one up here, and I'm just gonna cinch this guy down, and maybe, if I'm lucky, that'll pull it all into place. Now the tricky part is gonna be, this guy wants to move, so I'm gonna do that. And when I get to right about there, gets a little snug. Oh, I didn't get that on the camera very good. But I think my DIY bearing press may have worked. Let's see, moment of truth. Go in here, take this guy out, and no, the bearing's still not all the way in. Well, I think the problem is I can't get very much purchase on this, and it's spinning. So I'm trying to lock this guy up. There we go. There we go. All right, that got it. I felt it. I think that worked. I thought that last time though too, so we'll see. No. All right, we're gonna go have to use some power. Okay, I got it in there. It wasn't pretty, and I think I dinged the shield just a little bit, but the bearing still, for the most part, feels okay. I just had to use a proper hammer and a punch that was the right size, and as I was doing that, I got it wrong just one time, and I caught it in there sideways. But I think the bearing's okay still. Yeah. Bearing feels fine. It doesn't click or do anything, so I think we're going to be okay. Now, the trickier part of all of this is getting this back together, because the rotor is going to fight us the whole way. So what you can do to help with this is make yourself a tube of some sort out of some loose plastic material, a header card, even some like very thin cardstock works pretty well. So I'm going to take this header cardstock, stick that in there, right? And the reason I'm doing that is as I slide this guy down in there, it's going to help stop this guy from getting scratched up on the walls. So, whoa, I almost lost all my spacers already. In fact, I think I did. I lost my spacers. So I found the spacers, they fell off. So with the cardboard tube in there, and you want to make sure that you leave it big enough so that you can get it out. Ask me how I know how to do that wrong. You slide this guy in there so the shims stay on there. And as you get down in there, you'll just kind of slide this guy out, hopefully. Oh no, it's too tight. There we go. And that gets it most of the way in there without any risk of life or limb. All right, so that's in there. Now you'll want to clean the sensor board off because it's filthy. Small brush, maybe a little bit of denatured alcohol works great for this. And like I said, I'm not a super clean freak when it comes to these because they just kind of get dirty again, but giving a wipe down while you got it apart isn't a bad idea. Gently, you don't want to break into the parts off of the board. This guy goes with logo up or logo down. The sensor wire goes at the top. I almost forgot. Actually, is that true? Yeah. Yeah, sensor wire goes at the top. Otherwise, you'll be putting your end bell on backwards. And that would be a very bad time. Screw those back in. Before I tighten these up, I'm going to make sure that I have it set back to stock timing, which should be like 30 degrees. And the timing marks are on this side. Right in the middle at 30. snug those guys up. Hopefully it turns over nice and smooth. It does. Doesn't have a ton of end play. Probably could have taken out one of those shims, but we're gonna run her, see what happens. And like I said, this is not pretty, right? But that bearing's not gonna go anywhere. Like I just opened up the space before the race so I could bust out that broken race. And obviously, there's a bunch of people online, I'm sure, that know how to do this better than I do with a press or a bearing removal tool or anything like that. But this is a nice, simple way to look how you could fix this in the garage versus having to send it in to get replaced. Now, the real moment of truth here is if we did all of that work and it still functions correctly. So I'm going to bust out my tunalizer and test this guy out because I'm interested to see if it works as well. I've only done... I'm fortunate that I get lots of spare motors, so I've only had to change like 1 or 2 bearings ever, and I'm going to say that it probably went a little better than what I just did on the recording here. Trying to do it on the bench and get everything on camera maybe was, like you say, that's the problem. Manual motor test, it's a 4-pole motor, and then we'll just see. Oh, it works. It's a 4300 kV motor at 3 volts running pegged. It's right at 4400 kV, so that's pretty close. Reverse works. Sounds pretty smooth. All right. Fantastic. Well, that is not the official way to change a bearing in a motor. That is the Charlie way of repairing a motor that was going to be scrapped for the most part or had to be sent in. This was a field fix that I learned how to do because we needed to fix a motor and we just got after it. Figured worst case we could do is ruin the motor, which we couldn't use anyway. So, drilling on your end bell to push out broken bearing pieces, obviously not ideal. Smacking it around with a screwdriver and some hammers and stuff, also not ideal. But it does get the job done, and this will at least give us some service one more time. So for the price of a bearing and 15-20 minutes, I got a motor that works again. I can keep it around as emergency spare. But don't forget, folks, we do have a podcast. It's called RC Stuff, powered by HOBBYWING. Find it on your favorite podcast service. We give away a free combo each and every episode, first and third Friday of the month. Just look up RC Stuff, powered by HOBBYWING on your favorite podcast service. If you do have any questions, comments, or concerns, feel free to shoot us an email. You can reach out to us directly, NorthAmerica@hobbywing.com. We'll be glad to get you pointed in the right direction. And as always, folks, thanks for watching another episode of The Charlie Show right here on the HOBBYWING official YouTube channel. We'll see you all next time.